I'm going to tell the story of how NGA is working with governors and with states and using data and moreover the mapping of that data to help improve policy solutions and policy outcomes. So it's a little bit maybe different than some of the conversations we've been having, at least that I've heard today, because our function at the National Governors Association is really driven towards helping governors figure out, what are those policy levers that they need to tweak, that they need to create. And so it's a little bit of the story of that. And then I'm going to tell sort of the why this is important and a little bit of what we've been doing. And then Jim's going to come up and tell you actually how to do it, which I'm sure you're very interested in as well. And then maybe some of the, what's next and how do you tackle those next challenges as well. So I thought I'd start with my takeaway tweet. This is what I'm going to be tweeting out. I didn't count the characters, but I think it's, close enough in the range. Data and mapping helps governors gain policy insights to achieve better lives for their citizens. And that's really the bottom line, I think, in terms of what this is about and why it's so meaningful for us. And I want to say Esri's been a great partner with NGA at least 20, 25 years. I'm not sure. I'm looking at Pat if she can tell me to go higher than that, where they've worked with us to help our work be better and therefore our work with governors to be better. So let me roll into the slides here and give you a little more of the background and the details. So first of all, just want to be clear, we are not this NGA. We actually get this. I walked into a hotel a couple months ago where we were having a meeting and they had this logo on our sign with the, this way to the meeting. Even though I know you guys probably think this is really cool too. So sometimes I wish we were this NGA. So we are this NGA, and we do look a little bit differently than we did in 1908, where we had all those, those white men assembled as governors of the United States. We're now up to 9 women, very pleased to say that. We're the organization that represents the governors of the 55 states and territories. Very proud of our work, both in Washington, where we serve as the voice of the governors with the federal government, with Capitol Hill, but then moreover, very proud of our work that we do in the state houses across the country, where we're working with policy teams to think about what are those policy solutions at that level and what do they look like. So this is a very basic map. I know you've seen a lot of maps that look a lot more exciting than this, but I think it tells an important story just to give you a little context in terms of where we're at with governors at this point in time. So this is a map we put together right after the 2018 elections. And what's notable here is that we've got a heck of a lot of new governors. We've got 22 new governors. You'll see them represented in that kind of lavender shade there. We also have, importantly, 16 second and third term governors. I think what's important there is that I tell people they already know where the light switches are, and they can have kind of figured it out. And so they have a lot of opportunity and running room in terms of implementing their policies. So collectively, and of course, including those governors in the gray states that didn't have to worry about an election this year. Lots of opportunities, lots of interest in new ideas, and I'm sure you're probably hearing that as well if you work at the state level. You've got a new governor or a new repeat governor, and they're like, okay, this is my chance, this is what I'm going to do, and you have to figure out how to make that all happen. So I'm going to say a little bit about and just provide a couple examples of what governors are hearing about data. And then some of the ways that we've been using data and data mapping to help them with their policy decisions. Couple of examples here about what governors are hearing about and the importance of data. They know this. I have not met a governor yet that doesn't love data and love mapping and love seeing the visualization of it. I've been at NGA a little over 13 years now, and that's been consistent and probably even more increasing over that time. So the photo on your left is from our 2018 winter meeting. Every winter, we bring together all the governors in Washington, D.C. They listen to exciting speeches. They talk among themselves about their issues. And last year, as part of an initiative that we ran for Governor Sandoval on energy and transportation technology, we brought in the CEO of IBM, Ginny Rometty. And one of her messages was, data is the natural resource of the 21st century. And people have heard that before, right? Because she says that everywhere she goes, I noted, because I saw her speak again later. I'm like, oh, it's the same line she told the governors. So she's consistent. But I think I know that was really impressionable to governors, making them think about how, frankly, every state has this natural resource there, and how it was important to cultivate that natural resource and use that natural resource wisely, and think about the implications for what it meant for economic development and economic well-being. The second point I wanted to make, and I don't know how many folks here identify as chief data officers or chief information officers or sort of both of those things, but at our most recent winter meeting, which was just this last February, we had a panel around the concept of smart states. We've launched a smart states program to help kind of build upon and add to what's happening at the city level. And we had Governor Burgum there having a conversation with, woman you'll see there is the CEO of Deloitte, Kathy Engelbert. And her message, like she was very ardent about this, was to governors directly, elevate the role of your chief data officers. And she went on about why and how and why that was so important. And so that was another message that they heard. And I haven't yet checked to see if how many more chief data officers were created based on that or kind of what happened. But it certainly is something that we hear a lot about. And we think it's really critical that regardless of how they're structured or kind of where they sit within the state, that there's at least, an entity or a person that is thinking across all of the agencies and thinking about the opportunities to do that integration across all agencies. So here's a great example of how governors are using data and technology to help drive better policy solutions. This is a picture of Governor Sununu, again from our winter meeting. He's in front of a great opioid map that Esri helped put together. And the quote to the side of it is from a launch that they held a little bit earlier in the year on a new council on opioid overprescribing. And the reason he's so excited there, even though opioids, are a very tragic situation, the reason he's so excited there is because he knew that data represented in that map and additional data that they had was really going to be critical to them in terms of trying to identify where that overprescribing was happening and how they could then zero in on and think about what their interventions would be like and what their solution set would be. And so it was just a really critical challenge that they're facing in New Hampshire and certainly across the country. And he was really seeing the value of having this tool to be able to help him and others find a policy solution. So he's very excited about that. So this is a little bit about the story of how NGA has been using the data in terms of our work. We have a 70-person team that goes out to states on a daily basis and works with them on all sorts of issues around healthcare, around transportation, around environmental issues, workforce issues, et cetera. And we're really looking for how do we engage better on policy solutions. And making use of data and maps and story maps is our most recent addition, has really helped us be more effective in that. And the 3 shots you have here are of a new tool that we've been using with the help of Esri as part of what we call chairs initiative. So every NGA cycle has a chair and a vice chair, and the chair gets to select an initiative that they run for the year, common to a lot of organizations. And back in 2017, Governor Sandoval selected this ahead of the curve initiative, and we knew that we wanted to, since it was focused on technology, we needed to make it really cool and exciting. And Esri came to us and said, well, you're going to do story mapping, right? And we're like, sure, yeah. And what ended up happening is, we learned, trust me, we learned a lot. Put together actually 3 different story maps that we were able to share at the different summits that we had. We showed that at our NGA meetings. We've used that and shared that with states and have them be able to come to us and take part and make use of that information as they've taken, what was, we had a handbook that was like, here's your booklet of policy recommendations. And then we were able to say, and go to the story map and it's all going to come to life for you. And you're going to be able to zoom in on your state and see, do you have that policy in place already in your state or not? Or, how many EV chargers do you have in your state? And so do you need to think about what kind of investments you need to make going forward? So I was able to take, what's a really great document in terms of a roadmap we put together and bring it to life. And we did, and I say we because Esri can really take credit for this, but we did such a good job collectively that now it's expected that every chair's initiative is going to use these story maps. And indeed, the chair's initiative that's wrapping up just now, or we'll do so in a couple months, is using that. That's our Good Jobs for All Americans initiative that Governor Bullock is running. So thank you, Esri, for bringing our work really up to speed and making that more effective. So now I'm going to flip through real quickly because you guys have seen a lot of different maps, just how we're using maps and how we're tying them to different solutions. So I just have 6 examples to share with you. This one is of some broadband data that we pulled together. I know the data itself has some challenges, but found the best that we could in terms of broadband availability and broadband speed. We use this and then a state-specific map that we shared with each of the states to really tell the story of the need for targeted broadband investments. It's something that the governors talk about all the time. They recognize the gaps and the need to fill those gaps. And having this collection of story maps was really helpful for that. We've used it to combine a bunch of different data sets. This one is kind of looking at those different relationships that you might not think about already. This is a mapping of the different territories covered by the 4 major telecommunications companies. And I don't actually know which color is which of them, and they kind of all overlap. But what we did is we took that and then we layered on top of it the interstate highway system. And the idea there is that we know that as cars move to greater and greater levels of autonomy and want to draw upon more and more connected options, they're going to need to have better communications ability. And it's going to be both what's in place already, but what's going to be coming down the way, if you will, in terms of new things like 5G and other technology. So we wanted to try to get a sense of, are there a connection between the roads that folks are going to be driving on and the coverage that's already there, and then where there might be some gaps to fill in. And this was just an exercise to help us understand what do states need to be thinking about as they prepare for the future of that particular technology. I think I might have... skip one. So a new issue that governors are also really excited about, and I know this is underway at the local level as well, is taking advantage of the new Opportunity Zone tax credit program. Some of the details of that are still being worked out, but when we started working on this issue and hearing from states about what should we do around opportunity zones, how should we think about structuring our programs to attract investment, we did actually, I think it was 4 different maps to overlay where those opportunity zones were, and they were selected in concert with the governors in different census tracts around the country. And what does that mean for where infrastructure investments might be most needed? And so we did one map here on EV charging infrastructure and looked at what's the overlay between opportunity zones that are missing any sort of EV charging stations at all. And then we did another one that overlaid with impaired waterways with a thought that to the extent that funding can be directed towards some of these infrastructure needs and gaps that we see out there, that's going to help governors target that investment and tackle some of those infrastructure challenges that they're faced with. This next one is really interesting, and we were a little bit, I have to say, challenged by the data and what it might mean when we put it out. But we wanted to get at the issue of the unequal, let's just say, distribution of EV charging infrastructure. There's a big push to use this technology. It's still in the very early stages, but it's it's kind of seen as the future, or at least a part of the future for states. And one of the conversations that's already taking place around the country is that already we're seeing that the charging infrastructure is not distributed equally in terms of a number of different demographics, one of them being levels of income. And there's a lot of reasons for why that is, and a whole debate around, the vehicles need to be there before the charging stations and vice versa. So what we wanted to do is really try to discover whether or not what we were hearing anecdotally was actually taking place. So we worked with Esri to do some mapping of where at the time there were 16,000 public EV charging stations and more coming up all the time now, along with a layer of those zip codes that have are at 150% of the poverty level, and then zoom in to see, is it the case that there's a concentration of charging outside of those areas? And we didn't zoom in on every single area, but the ones that we selected, just bore that out. And what was helpful with that is it helped us, as we've now gone around the country and we've been holding a series of EV workshops with state officials. It's helped us have this conversation to say, yeah, this is what's happening. That doesn't mean that you should necessarily rush in and put a charging station there, because that may not be what that community needs or wants, or that may not be the right solution, but it helped us start that conversation. And so we've seen this kind of approach as really helpful, just to get some of the basic data and information out there and have it be more visual. And then I think I have one or two more. We, as part of our Ahead of the Curve initiative, we did some mapping of level of disrepair, really, for bridges across the country. This is a zoom in for the kind of DC, Northern Virginia area of the country. We're able to identify and layer many different pieces of data around the age of the bridges, what their condition was, who owned the bridges, there was one other data point in there as well. And that was an example that we used as we did workshops around transportation infrastructure and talked about how this data can then be helpful to transportation planners and others who are already using things like drones to help do inspections and think about more regular safety monitoring of bridges, and to be able to think about, well, how do you can't do that everywhere. So how do you target that to the places that seem to be having the most trouble already? Okay, so this is my last one. This is kind of more the fun one, where, again, we recognize that being able to have a picture of something and being able to have some of that snappy data at your fingertips is really critical. So as part of, again, this last CHAIRS initiative that we have been doing with Governor Bullock, put together a 2-page data sheet for each state with a whole grouping of key factoids of household income and spending trends and education levels, and tied this to this initiative around good jobs for all Americans, so that governors could take a look at this. It's kind of more like a dashboard type approach, and think about where is my state in terms of some of these metrics, and so what are the solutions that I need to work on if I'm thinking about developing the workforce of the future. So with that, I have animation, cool. I didn't know that. That's the story that we've been encountering. It's been really helpful for us. We still feel like, we're crawling, not even walking, when I look at some of the maps and the technology that people are using. But we found it really helpful to do our work that's supporting the governors for doing their work, and making that critical connection between the data and the solutions. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jim, and he's going to tell you what next and how you can get this all done.
Well, thank you for attending the last session of the day. No, just kidding. This will only be about an hour on this topic. Is that right? That's right. Okay. Or it could be about 15 minutes. I'm Jim Herries. I'm a geographer here at Esri. I have the privilege of working with people like Sue all the time on a topic that is now, to me, known as policy mapping. I've been doing it for 24 years. I just didn't hear anyone call it that. We titled this Policy Maps Driving Data Literacy because, when they said, can you present about data literacy? I was kind of like, no, I don't want to talk about data literacy because that's so broad. It's like, let's talk about geography. It's too broad. I wanted to talk about my experience in policy mapping and how that may relate to data literacy. And this diagram is been around for a little bit for me. When I saw it, I knew I had to talk about this topic in this relationship. What's in the middle of the diagram? You see a whale, I love it. Not the iceberg. It's a large iceberg, and how do icebergs exist? They're just big chunks of ice, right? They have a physical characteristic. And what is the thing that makes icebergs interesting? It's the water, right? The supporting infrastructure that allows an iceberg to move along and get in the way of things. That's a hint at what's coming. This topic is actually about policy maps. The iceberg metaphor is going to work its way in along the way. It was Stephen Goldsmith 4 years ago? Gave this statement to me. I was showing him a map of median household income for a city. It's a beautiful map. My team had worked hard on it. It had beautiful colors, a lovely pop-up, great information product about median household income. I said, Stephen, why is this not a policy map? He said, it's simple. I don't see where there's an opportunity to intervene. It's a lovely map of data. It's well executed. The colors are nice. The breakpoints are thoughtful. And yet, he doesn't know where he's to intervene. It was my sort of aha, which many of you have probably already had, but happened for me in 2015, that we need focus on these maps. So, trick question, which of these 3 maps is a policy map? Now, I know the answer's on screen if you read it, but this data, I'll tell you what it is. It's pedestrian and bicycle accidents in the city of Pasadena over some reasonable period of time. So every dot on that map on the left is an accident of some kind. Is it a policy map? No, I don't see where to intervene. It looks like this problem is everywhere. And that's usually how we feel at the start of a project when somebody comes to you and says, we want to talk about mental health, or we want to talk about guns, or we want to talk about this. At first, you're like, oh my gosh, this is going to be difficult. And yet the public perception is, if it's in the news, it's happening everywhere. Or at least the news tries really hard to make you feel that way. And yet the data may or may not support that notion, that it's everywhere. Now, at first glance, it looks like there are accidents everywhere. Does everybody stay out of Pasadena? The other 2 maps are not policy maps either, even though the top one is a nice hex bin map. And, heat map. I've seen some heat maps over the past 2 days. I like heat maps. None of these are policy maps. Can anyone tell me why? Yeah, that's why you're all in this class. The reason why is, even the heat map, what's the denominator? How many occurred inside of a little bin? What's the bin got to do with it? What is the denominator that should be involved with counting accidents per mile? The amount of traffic might be an interesting denominator. The number of teenagers driving might be an interesting denominator. Just think about the denominator. On the positive side here, we have data, but on the negative side, we know, all of us in this room, that this data is biased. How is this data biased? These are the accidents. Where are the near misses? Where are the unreported accidents, right? Data literacy comes from data and context. I have a laser pointer that Gertie was kind enough to acquire for me. So if you have a cat, now is the time to bring it out. Is that bright enough? Let's try it. Here we took the same data, and each of these white dots is a school. So this school right here has a 1/4-mile walk shed around it. And this school right here has a 1/4-mile walk shed around it. What's the difference between these 2 schools? This one has many more accidents, and this one had 2 fatals. These 4 schools have many more accidents and 2 fatals. Here's one that fell just a hair outside the 1/4-mile buffer. Do we count it or not count it? Yeah, that's a tough question. And so these kinds of maps, when you start to attack the problem, remember, there's accidents everywhere. We got to solve the problem everywhere. Well, we can't do that. We all know we have limited budget, time, resources. Maybe an angle to take is, what if we focus on accidents near the school? What might that look like? And what questions might it raise? So, for example, I showed this to someone actually pretty recently, and they said, yeah, I wonder if all the schools start at the same time. And that's why the last-minute crush of cars comes in. We like to say good maps answer a specific question, and they raise 3 more. Over the years, we've collected a number of policy maps and put them into the esri.com/policy maps website. It's got hundreds of examples of ready-to-use maps, such as this map of commuter alternatives. So instead of driving in your car alone to work, feeling a little uncomfortable today, what are the other options in Denver? You see around downtown Denver, there are a lot of people walking to work, and you see buses and carpools, and click on any of those census tracts. It's available for your information. Or poverty in Orange County, Real Housewives of Orange County, that's one view of Orange County. This is another view, and you can kind of see from the clusters where concentrations and large numbers, right? You've got a concentration in dark red and a quantity based on the size of the symbols. So you can kind of see almost like grapes where there are clusters of kids in poverty. Also in the Policy Maps website are examples such as you've seen all these past 2 days of people putting dashboards and applications together, putting the data together into their solution. So I was very pleased to see in Sue's presentation of the electric vehicle charging zones, there was a layer underneath the poverty, and there was a pop-up. My team wrote that pop-up. My team built that layer. She found it. Did you ever call me to use it? Nope. They just used it because it was there and it was a good information product. So as we think about what a policy map is and isn't, oftentimes we all start with the visible symptoms, right? The data of accidents. People can see an accident, there's a report taken, it's very visible, much like this event, the Titanic. Now you know why the iceberg is on the screen. Oftentimes we map these visible symptoms at first because they're brought to your attention. People are talking about it. It doesn't seem right that ... These are best when you illuminate the data by some kind of expectation. So my encouragement to you, when you are going to map symptoms of a problem, is to try to use a meaningful measure where you put things in context and answer questions like, where is this happening? How bad is it? Or how good is it? If you can personalize the problem, I mean, a map is a tremendous way to personalize a problem. For example, the park score data set shows you if you live in any of those areas in dark green or light green, well, the dark green are the parks. The light green are areas that are within a 10-minute walk of a park. Trust for Public Land puts this out. In Atlanta, all the areas in red and orange, you can't walk to a park in 10 minutes. And same thing in Los Angeles. The Clean Streets Index. We all tend to live on a street somewhere. You're able to look up your street just like looking up in Zillow. How did the city of LA rate your street in the most recent survey? Green is clean, yellow is somewhat clean, and red is not clean. They could have done some complex data-driven thing. I love that they just simplified it and put it in the common person's language. Clean, somewhat clean, not clean. I use that for my kids' bedrooms. Drug poisoning deaths, this was mentioned earlier, and I love this example because just at a glance from the back of the room, can you see a cluster? Right? That doesn't happen by defaults in software. You know why they're called defaults, right? Because using them is default of you, the person who chose that. Please encourage whoever is making your map to shift off the defaults as far as is necessary to get the communication across. In this case, color is used to show high rates of drug poisoning deaths. Red is bad. The national average grounds this map color-wise in the middle with sort of a white color, and low deaths are blue. Those are all editorial choices. The person who made this map wants you to see the interesting part of the histogram in their editorial choice, right? Mapping those meaningful measures gives you power over those visible symptoms and helps people engage with them, helps them become literate about what you're talking about. I want to talk about this enabling infrastructure a little bit. So one thing to consider is how does your data collection process actually bias your results? Are you capturing everything you need to? What are you missing, like in the example of near misses with accidents? Do you have bias in the people involved in your data collection? You ever heard somebody say something like, never had any complaints? It's usually a red flag, isn't it? Like, oh, we need to dig in deeper here, don't we? Or come in the side door. There are times people kind of work with the data a certain way. And in my experience in working with policy mapping, it can be kind of a tiptoe process, like when you encounter that really strong personality who has power over the data and is a subject matter expert. Yeah, I can't just barge in there and tell them how to make a map. I need to kind of understand their perspective and understand their bias and decide how we might approach it. Of course, infrastructure to many people in this room has a physical connotation. For example, sidewalks, roads, etc. But also I'd like you to invite you to think about your policy as infrastructure. What part of our policy making allows opioid prescriptions to vary this significantly across the country? Again, using a map style where we made an editorial choice. We're going to put in bright blue what is considered to be high rates of prescription claims, and in tan, low rates. And we're going to see if there's any variation of significance. Now, everything I've talked about so far is above the surface, right? We all can criticize the captain of the Titanic. You should have seen the iceberg. You should have had the latest tech. You should have. Well, consider the time, 1912, right? Imagine you're the CIO of Cunard. You have the latest technology. It's called the Titanic, and it's unsinkable. I have it right here in a contract, right? There's this new thing called radio that people are using, and we've got a unit on the ship. Check. We're sailing across the northern Atlantic like we always have been. Haven't had any complaints. So all that to say, when it hit the iceberg, suddenly it became a visible symptom of a larger problem, didn't it? But there was an enabling infrastructure, and there were many things going on under the surface. There was resistance to change. With the captain, didn't want to slow down. He wanted to set a speed record. We've always done it this way, haven't had any complaints. It would cost money, or we lose other benefits if we change. This is a popular one lately. It doesn't fit the political narrative, perhaps even to talk about it. I've had that happen before. Food deserts don't exist. Let's see. Let's go see. Oftentimes, the way we recommend to deal with that resistance is what I've seen so many examples of in the past 2 days. Engagement. City of Johns Creeks, they have a sidewalk improvement policy. They have this wonderful website where you can see what they are talking about. So it's personal, right? Every citizen of Johns Creek cares about some part of the town, but they may not care about all of the town. But they might care about certain intersections where their kids cross to go to school. And of course, we use the maps to engage and say, look, here's the vision. Here is the plan of what we would like to do. Everything in green. Look how connected we are. You can get around town through this parkway system, bike and hike and walk and get where you want to be. So often engaging with them and on the maps is specifically just to address the resistance, or at least to engage it. I've noticed in all the policy maps we make, we often have unclear expectations. Questions like, when we're mapping pedestrian deaths, bike pedestrian deaths, well, what's our goal? I mean, who wants to say anything other than 0, right? But you have to be realistic. So sometimes just a down arrow is what you're looking for. We're looking for reductions. And same thing with, why is the county concerned with the number of opioid deaths? They did it to themselves. No. The county is paying for this, and here's how. Emergency responses, all the things that add up. We want to take control of that, so maybe we want to make people aware. These numbers are increasing, and it's having these other effects upon us. Your expectation may be that the county just snaps its finger and solves this problem, but how realistic is that? And how many people should have access to a park? That's a hard question, but all we can do is show what's there. This is one of my favorite maps. I'll read it for you. In July 2016, the House approved Comprehensive Addiction and Recovery Act, CARA, bipartisan vote, 407 to 5. Boy, that sounds like a nice ratio. I wonder if one of the 5 has a high drug poisoning death pattern going on in his district. That's his district. Thomas Massey at the time had a lot of red dots in his district. What a great map to walk into or to send or for him to somehow see. Often, and this map took all of 60 seconds to make, taking the map that was used in Sue's presentation that I showed earlier, the red dot map, and taking those congressional districts and just dropping them on for a discussion. It's not an accusation. It's just an observation that you voted this way, and yet this problem seems to be occurring in your own district. I leave it up to you to judge when to play that card. Hidden causes are another thing to keep an eye out in an area where I think your organization, CIOs, and the data you control and publish can have a big effect. So in the case of Titanic, the headline says it all: the desire to make speed record responsible for Titanic loss. Never mind the iceberg, never mind the choice to take the short route across the North Atlantic, never mind the time that they departed. They were delayed, I believe, a little bit in their departure. Never mind that if he had gone 1 knot faster over the whole trip, do you ever think he may have missed the whole thing? Right? It's all part of the equation. What are these hidden causes? Well, usually there's a string of things. Oftentimes, sources for coming up with map ideas are your own departments. And we've heard a lot about the hub, your police, fire, street, customer service. When they are able to weigh in on what they believe the root causes are, it causes those conversations to occur. Let's go see, let's map it. Can you get me some data? And the analysis of that can help influence their thinking about that infrastructure. When I grew up, if you wanted to go bike, you take your chances with the cars. There weren't bike lanes. Now there's bike lanes. I think that's great. We also didn't have helmets. I gotta talk to the parents about that. Other chronic problems have more deeply rooted causes, and those are the ones we get a little uncomfortable talking about sometimes, but if for nothing else, to understand issues of equity and how you're responding to things going on, it is useful to have a resource like the Policy Maps website from Esri, the Living Atlas, all these ready-to-use layers that for 5 minutes effort, you can drape a map of poverty underneath whatever it is you're putting on top, your facilities, your programs, to just get a fundamental understanding of what is the spatial relationship like between a lot of these wonderful policy maps that cover homelessness or poverty or income, housing characteristics. I checked before I came. You're in a census tract with 80% renter-occupied housing. Did you know that? You'll go home knowing that you're in a census tract with 80% renter housing. Does that mean anything to anybody? Has no context, does it? The county has 40%, so evidently this tract is helping with the issue of renter housing. Blight was an example used over the past 2 days as well. When we got involved with policy mapping on blight, we thought the job was to map the blight. And they very quickly backed us up and said, no. What they're interested in is detecting blight that's about to happen. So the city has data on utility payments that are 60 days past due. That's a signal. We have demographic data about where are the seniors who don't spend as much on home improvement as they did when they had income from jobs. That was a new fact to me. That's what I enjoy about my job the most is if you can have somebody on these projects, on these teams, who their curiosity is rewarded for looking for relationships, that helps your policy mapping, that helps data literacy of your team and your customers grow as they start to think more and ask questions that are relevant. So the bottom question, are you mapping the symptom, the blight citation, Or are you mapping the early indicators? My hope is this framework is useful to you. In summary, GIS improves data literacy by letting you map all of these things. Not just the symptoms. It's a good place to start, always. But actually trying to attempt to map what you believe the problem to be causes you, when you build that story map, and you have to start to think, well, what is my narrative? And does this map support the narrative? That has a good forcing function. When you're mapping the enabling infrastructure and the root causes, the resistance mapping bias, all of these things add up. And again, we've put a number of these resources out there under esri.com/policy maps, more as examples for you to, you can open ArcGIS Online and pull one of those layers in and start to make that map very rapidly. My hope is that you'll look at the work you're doing and maybe go back and look at your portfolio of your story maps, your web maps, anything public facing, and kind of mark off, are these addressing visible symptoms only? Or am I putting the visible symptoms in the context of hidden causes or in terms of resistance? Just wanted to give you this framework as one of many ways to kind of think about the portfolio of maps and data projects that you're working on. Thank you for coming.